May surprise some people that Penn State could claim themselves as the kings of the Fiesta Bowl, 7-0 all time. And this certainly the most important one since, you may recall, the 1986 national championship game against Miami. That one was pretty big in and of itself, maybe the most watched college football game for decades at that point. Okay, this one a pretty big one as well. Boise State on deck. We got Marty Leap from Penn State Rivals here to break it all down. Marty, good to see you. How's everything going?
Pretty good, Mark. Good to see you. Had a good holiday, and ready to get out of it. The Fiesta Bowl on Tuesday should be a great game.
All right. I'm still trying to make heads or tails out of this SMU game, and I think a lot of people are as well, because to compare SMU and Boise State is a fair comparison, I think. I don't know who's the better team between the two. Penn State was actually a less substantial favorite against SMU at home than they are against Boise State. SMU had a pretty capable situation throughout this season and played well against quality competition for the most part. And really, we're not blown out against anyone. Then up steps Penn State and puts them in their place. Kevin Jennings obviously had a lot to do with that. So I'm trying to balance the Kevin Jennings threw the ball game away in the first half versus Penn State played great defense and did what they needed to do. And then when they, after that wave of interceptions, and they had the big lead, they certainly pounded the rock and established their run game and showed that they were the more dominant team. So how would you grade the effort and really get a perspective and a grasp on what they did against SMU?
Yeah, you mentioned the Kevin Jennings interceptions. Obviously, those are the biggest plays of the game, because when you're facing a team the caliber of Penn State, but especially when it's at Beaver Stadium, if you dig yourself a hole like that early, you're in a lot of trouble. And then that's exactly what happened. Now, I do think you saw the importance of home field advantage in that game, because the weather was horrendous, which really slowed down both passing games. I felt had a major impact on special teams, how cold it was. And the crowd was raucous. You saw it, and the broadcast mentioned it a couple of times. Every time Kevin Jennings would go the hands over the ears, it was just Beaver Stadium went nuts. And I thought that was the worst thing he could do, is even if he couldn't hear, they needed to figure something else out, because all it did was get the crowd riled up. So you have the crowd going wild. You throw the 2 pick sixes. I thought the home field advantage was huge in that game. Now, I mean, at the same time, Penn State did play really well defensively. They held SMU to under 2 yards a carry. If you adjust it for sacks, it was still under 3 yards per carry. Kevin Jennings never looked comfortable. He just looked miserable from the start. The weather, the way Penn State's defense was playing, all of it. And like you said, SMU is a team who had not been blown out all year. Their 2 losses were by a last-second 50-plus yard field goal to a Clemson team that won the ACC, and by, I think it was 2 or 3 points against BYU, who just pounded Colorado last night to finish year 11-2. So the Cougars are a pretty good team as well. I think SMU is a good football team. To tie back to your comments on them in Boise, I think top to bottom, SMU is probably the better team, and the line reflects that, right? Like you said, Penn State's a bigger favorite on a neutral site against Boise than they were at home against SMU. Now, obviously, Boise's got the best player of the 2 teams in Ashton Jeanty. And I think, the Broncos, the program as a whole, I think might be better well equipped for the moment, because, playing in big games isn't unheard of to Boise State in the last 2 decades. SMU hadn't played in a game of that caliber since the 1980s. So I think there's probably something to it there as well. But I do think that SMU is the better all-around team than Boise. But again, Boise's got the ultimate X factor in Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah, and so let's start with him, because it's conventional wisdom that he has to go off for Boise State to have a chance in this game. And that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Maddox Madsen is certainly not Peyton Manning or Trevor Lawrence, a guy that you're going to put the entire game plan on and say, throw it 50 times and win this game. He needs a lot of support, and that's the guy to do it. So how do you look at the matchup of Ashton Jeanty? And let's not forget, there's an offensive line that needs to block for him. I know that he's got more yards after contact than anybody in the country and does a lot by himself. But if he doesn't get blocking, it's going to be a long, long night.
Yeah, if he doesn't get blocking, it's going to be a long night, especially against Penn State. I mean, no knock on some of the teams Boise's played, but if you're struggling at the point of attack against Mountain West Conference opponents, and you have a back like Jeanty, he can make guys miss, run over a guy or 2, and go. You're not going to do that against a defense caliber of Penn State. So I think that's going to be very important. I think if you're Penn State, you need to go into the game almost accepting Jeanty's probably going to rip 2 or 3 long ones, because that's just what he does. But if you can get to the end of the game and he's got those 2 or 3 runs of 15, 20 yards, but you look up and outside of those runs, you're keeping him to like 2, 3 yards of carry. I think you're going to be happy with that. I think that sets you up for success. I'm not sure what Tom Allen's going to do, but knowing the way Tom Allen likes to operate a defense and how much faith he has in his defensive backs, I think this is a game they're going to come out, put 8 guys in the box, maybe even borderline 9, depending on where they line Jalen Reed or Zion Tracy up at in safety, and just dare Boise to throw the ball. Because, I mean, like you said, Maddox Madsen's not a quarterback that scares you. I mean, I think Kevin Jennings is significantly better than Maddox Madsen, and look what they just did to him. So SMU has significantly better receivers, and look what they just did to them. So, I think if you're Penn State, you come out and you just go all in on stopping this running attack. You attack that offensive line of Boise State's. You load the box, and you dare Maddox Madsen to find a way to beat you, because I don't think he can. I mean, if you look at Boise, not a knock on them, because they are quietly been one of the best programs in the country for 2 decades now. And Ashton Jeanty is awesome, and it's so cool in today's college football to see a guy like Jeanty stay at Boise State and not transfer somewhere else after last year. But you look at the regular season. I know a lot of people want to point at that Oregon game where they only lost by 3, but Oregon had, I think, 3 second half turnovers that gave Boise short fields. They turned into points. That was also when Oregon's offensive line was a hot mess early in the year with injuries. Gabriel was still learning the system. There's a lot to it. And as the year went on, I remember watching their game against Wyoming in November, and that's a game that, quite frankly, Boise State should have lost. They were very lucky to escape against UNLV the first time. Their offense struggled against UNLV when they replayed in the Mountain West Championship game. So I do think that, if you're Penn State, there really is no excuses here, where if Maddox Madsen comes out and makes plays and beats you, you tip your cap, because that shouldn't be happening. I think you need to go all in and all out to stop Ashton Jeanty, because I think if you can keep him contained, you're going to win the game, and probably comfortably.
Is there anybody else that you come across in this offense? Cam Camper's a guy that played at Indiana, so he's used to playing Big Ten defenses for a couple seasons there with the Hoosiers, got 63 balls for 2 years. But anyone else that scares you a little bit out of the Boise State offense, or that should be accounted for in some way?
I mean, obviously, like you said, Cam Camper was the one that would come to mind for me. He's a good receiver. He has experience playing against Big Ten defenses, as you mentioned. I'm sure AJ Harris is just going to follow him around on Tuesday night. Wherever Camper goes, AJ Harris will follow. Because I think if you're Penn State, you're very confident AJ Harris can take him away, because AJ Harris very quietly this year was one of the best cornerbacks in the Big Ten. It was your typical cornerback where you don't get the recognition because people just simply don't throw at you. Very similar to when Joey Porter Jr. was at Penn State and people wanted to knock him for not having pass breakups and not having interceptions, because nobody threw at him. That's how it was this year with AJ Harris. People didn't throw at him at all. So I think you're confident he can take Camper away, because Camper's the one guy I think that would worry you, where, you get a busted coverage, or, let him get behind you or something if Madsen makes a throw to him, and there could be some big plays there. But outside of that, they're really, I don't think there's anyone here that you're super concerned about. I mean, maybe Matt Lauder, the tight end, he's had a nice year for them. I think he's averaging about 15 yards a catch. And, depending on how you want to set up your defense to focus on Jeanty and how much attention the linebackers are paying to him, maybe that could open up some space in the middle of the field for him. But at the same time, like, I think even if there's if you're Penn State and they want to hit their tight end over the middle for 7-8 yard gains here and there, you're going to give that up, because that's not going to kill you, and you trust your defense then to turn around and get a stop. So yeah, Camper and Lauder would be the two to watch, I think, outside of Jeanty. But Boise, they are what they are. It's going to come down to Ashton Jeanty. You stop Ashton Jeanty, you're going to win the game, and probably comfortably. And if Ashton Jeanty goes berserk for 200 yards or something, you're going to be in for a dogfight.
And then, Marty, on the offensive side, no one would state this on the Penn State side, but why not be pretty vanilla, not ultra vanilla, like you're just going to run off tackle the entire night and throw the ball to Tyler Warren? But you got 2 games left after this. Let's not assume a win. Certainly, Boise State's a quality team. They're a top 25 team, I think, in the nation, legitimately. Forget the ranking. They are a top 25 team, and Penn State's a top 5 or 6 team. But until proven otherwise, you got Allen and Singleton, and you run the offense, and maybe you pull a few little stops here and there, a few little tricks, but let's not give too much away for future games and run it maybe 60-40 against the pass ratio, and let's win the game.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned with Penn State on defense, where you're confident Boise State's not going to block that front, right? Denied Dan Sutton, Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, it goes on and on. I think if you're Penn State's offense and you're looking at Boise's defensive front, it's the complete opposite. Your offensive line has been really good this year, coming off of 2 really strong performances against a SMU team that was ranked, I think, like 7th or 8th nationally against the run going into that game, and they've got some big bodies up front. Penn State, for the most part, pushed them around. Game before that against Oregon, which might be the best front 7 in the country, pushed them around and ran for almost 300 yards. You're confident. Yes, you need to account for Jaden Virgin. I think he is a tremendous pass rusher, one of the most underrated players in college football. But if you can neutralize him on pass downs, I'm with you. There's no reason you can't come out and just run the ball right down their throats. And I think one other very not talked about, overlooked stat, whatever you want to put at, there are 134 FBS football teams. Boise State ranks 134th in missed tackle percentage on defense. And when you've got an offense with a Nick Singleton, with a Katron Allen, you can get those guys in space where you put them one-on-one with a linebacker or a safety where, hey, you make one guy miss and you're going a long way. That wouldn't put a lot of faith in me as a Boise State fan or as a coach. I'd be really worried about how many tackles they've missed this year, where if you can get Singleton in space, you can get Allen off tackle, Tyler Warren, even Trey Wallace, who had a pretty good game against SMU. If you can get the ball to him quickly, Amari Evans, their deep threat guy, where again, with his speed, maybe even just a quick hitter out in the flats, make one guy miss and go. I think that'll be something to watch as well, because I'm with you. I don't think you need to get super creative offensively to put up points against Boise State. And that's where I think, looking at this from a Penn State perspective, even if Jeanty goes full Superman mode on Tuesday night, I don't know how worried you get, because I don't know how many stops Boise State's going to get defensively. I could easily see Penn State putting up 35, 38 points again, and not the way they did against SMU with a couple of defensive touchdowns so the offense got going, but in a way where they're just methodically up and down the field. And like you said, if you can do that and do it without having to get super creative, and that's just, one more gadget wrinkle, whatever it is, you can save for a potential matchup with Georgia or Notre Dame and beyond. That's a plus if you're Andy Coulter-Nicky and you're Penn State. So I think this is a game where you put the onus on your offensive line. You come out and you tell them, say, look, you're bigger, you're stronger, you're more athletic than these guys. You need to come out and push them around, make lanes for your backs. And again, to go back to the missed tackle, they're 134th. They're dead last in the country in missed tackle rate. That, if I'm a defense facing Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, that worries me a lot. Even Tyler Warren, because if you can get Warren going with a full head of steam, miss one guy and go. Even he's not the fastest guy in the world, but if there's a safety or someone with an angle, he's a big guy. He's likely to just plow you over and keep going. So that would worry me a lot if I was Boise going into this game.
Marty, the reputation of James Franklin. I think it's a bit overplayed, but I have taken my shots from time to time when there have been some curious decisions. And one that stands out against SMU was up 14-0, own 19-yard line, 4th and 1. Okay, I get it. It would drive me nuts too if I was a head coach, knowing we only have so many possessions in a game. And anytime I see a back or a quarterback that could have gotten the first down if they would have been a little bit more conscious of where the first down marker was, and you're that close to a first down, it would kill me as a head coach to punt as well, regardless of where the ball was on the field. I'd be like, we're giving up a possession here. We should be able to get that half yard. But still, I scratched my head on that one. I thought, just punt. Your defense is great. Punt the ball. Don't give them any opportunity to get back in this game. And of course, if it wasn't for Dominic DeLuca making a ridiculous play, maybe SMU cuts it to 14-7. So the James Franklin dynamic of, again, I think he takes way too much criticism, but it is a question from time to time.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said on that play. I'm like you. Most of the time, 4th and 1, 4th and less than 1, especially when you got a quarterback who's 6'5", 245 pounds. Take the snap, plow forward to get your first down. When you're that deep in your own territory, you were leading 14-0. Your defense had absolutely stymied SMU. I know you struggled with that drive, but even offensively, the previous drive, they'd marched down the field and had that failed 4th down conversion where they didn't want to kick the field goal in the element. So the offense was starting to find a little bit of rhythm. Punt it, pin them back. Don't risk, like you said, giving SMU life there. And thankfully it didn't matter, because Dominic DeLuca, what was Superman in that game. Just went nuts for the Nittany Lion defense, which was cool to see. But yeah, I didn't understand the decision. I didn't like it. I think times this year, James has caught in some flack for his decisions to go for two, go for it on fourth downs. And 98% of the time, I've agreed with his decision. That was definitely in the 2%, though. I thought that was extremely risky. And, his defense bailed him out. And maybe that was part of it, him having so much faith in his defense and figuring, hey, SMU's probably in 4-down territory here, especially how hard it was to kick in that weather. And he was thinking, what, they're probably, like I said, 4-down territory. I trust my defense to get off the field. And again, it didn't matter because Dominic DeLuca tipped the ball up and intercepted it. And again, like I said, it was cool for DeLuca. Just for people watching this who may not be Penn State fans or coming in and try and get their knowledge of the game beforehand, Dom DeLuca started his career as a walk-on from like 50 miles from campus. So to see him go from guy who began his career as like lifelong Penn State fan, walks on, works his way to scholarship, and in the school's biggest game in a long time, absolutely went off, which is cool to see. One of those things that's so cool about college football. But yeah, I didn't agree with the decision. Thankfully, it didn't come back to bite them. But at the same time, it's tough because for a long time, people were tough on James Franklin for not being aggressive enough in those situations. And I feel like the last 2 years, this year especially, he has been much more aggressive on fourth and shorts. I mean, look at the fake punting against Minnesota. That might be the biggest play of the season for them. And I think, a year or two ago, you never would have seen him call that. So it's hard because you want to see them be aggressive. And I'm always of the belief I'd rather be overly aggressive and maybe get burned for it than not be aggressive enough and get burned for it. But that one was probably a bit too far. But again, thankfully, it did not come back to bite them.
College football junkies, you're here, so why not order this one? Disputed National Champions. It's a look at the 1990s. It's a historical reset of a breakdown of each season, but it's much more than that. It's not a history book. It sets everything forward into the 4-team, the 12-team, and the proposed 14-team college football playoff era. Give it a look. The links in the description section down below.
Nobody stops Ashton Jeanty. You look at his stats this year, and his season low in rushing yards was 127 yards against an FCS team, but his worst game was just 128 yards on a 3.9 average against a ranked UNLV team that has a really stellar defense with an All-American linebacker. So Ashton Jeanty was never really stopped this year, but you have to contain him because there'll be games where Boise State may have to feed him 30 times for him to get those stats, but still, he averaged 7.3 yards per carry this year. I know his best football was played in September before teams were really loading up 8, sometimes even 9 in the box every play just to stop him. And what's most dangerous about Ashton Jeanty, well, he's a combination of it all: strength, speed, power, low center of gravity. But Ashton Jeanty's yards after contact are the most scary thing about him. He has 1882 yards after contact, which would lead the country in rushing yards alone. He has 2497 rushing yards. He's 131 away from Barry Sanders' record. And as I said, his season low is 127. So odds are if he has a standard day, he reaches Barry Sanders' record in this Fiesta Bowl. But this is going to be the toughest defensive front that he played against all season. He played against Oregon, had 192 yards earlier in the season. He played against UNLV, which was a good one, but Penn State's just a different animal, and we saw Penn State's defense completely take over that SMU game. They didn't even really need to blitz or provide extra pressure to keep SMU just at the line of scrimmage, to dominate SMU at the line of scrimmage, and then SMU was just making mistakes and a balloon from there. But Ashton Jeanty, he's going to produce his yards in this game, and I think Penn State's going to keep 8 in the box probably most of this game is going to be their plan of attack. Force Maddox Madsen to win that game through his arm and see how Boise State can do in that regard.
Madsen, you bring him up, and he's a pretty good support in the run game. 4.5 yards per carry, scored 5 rushing touchdowns, the impressive 22-3 touchdown to pick ratio. So what are your thoughts about the opportunity for this Boise State passing game to provide the complement to the offense that's needed?
Well, Boise State's entire passing game, a lot of it just relies on the threat of the run game. They run a lot of play action. It kind of reminds me of what the San Francisco 49ers were doing with Christian McCaffrey and just had a lot of play action, which made Brock Purdy look like a pretty good quarterback last season when they were all healthy. And I think Boise State's a lot similar in that regard. And Maddox Madsen, you just mentioned, has an incredible touchdown to interception ratio of 22-3, gets a lot of his wide receivers open because these teams are just stacking the box. He's getting his receivers on islands, and he's finding openings downfield. Latrell Caples and Cam Camper are some of the top receivers that Boise State's going to utilize in this matchup, try to get them downfield. But yeah, Cam Camper, he averages over 15 yards reception. So it's Boise State using that play action to get guys open downfield. You don't see too much of the quick screen passing game with them. They like to take a little more yardage per throw in order when they're dropping back to pass. But yeah, Maddox Madsen, he's not going to throw for 300 yards every week. I think he only did that one time this year, but he's been a serviceable quarterback. Won the job over Malachi Nelson back in the fall, to a lot of people's surprise, but I think he's done a really good job with it. He's had a lot of games where he's been super efficient, but there have been a few games where he's been off this year. A 9 of 20 performance against Nevada, and Boise State really had to grind out a win there. That came down to the wire, and Nevada was a team that went winless in Mountain West play. So there have been some off games from him, and the off games have produced some near upsets against Boise State.
And you bring up Cam Camper. He is not a stranger to Big Ten defenses, having stayed at Indiana for 2 years, 63 receptions those 2 seasons with the Hoosiers. Steve, as we transition to a look at the Boise State defense, I'll bring the Penn State SMU game into it, because sometimes it's difficult in a situation like Penn State blowing out SMU, and in the manner that they burst out to this 21-0 lead, difficult to get a gauge on how impressive Penn State was versus how much they had the game handed to them. And, 2 pick sixes out of the gate. Credit Penn State for catching the football and returning it, but obviously 2 errant throws, 2 bad decisions there. Then SMU, of course, to lead off the game, had a nice drive going, went for it on 4th and 1. Jennings should have taken off and run with it. He still had a touchdown pass right in front of him, made a bad throw to Matthew Hibner. And then, of course, the 3rd interception was on the edge of the goal line, about the 5-6 yard line, where Dominic DeLuca made an exceptional play for Penn State. So credit Penn State, but at the same time, on one hand, it appears as though the game got out of hand quickly, and they didn't necessarily need to be dominant offensively. And of course, though, at the same time, Penn State with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen pretty much beat down that SMU front and did what you would expect Penn State to do against an SMU front 7. And so we'll transition that to Boise State's front 7 in trying to take on this Penn State offensive line and 1-2 punch with Allen and Singleton.
Yeah, Penn State's offense never got going until the late second quarter of that game. I kind of think I remember talking about you with this when we were previewing SMU Boise State or SMU Penn State. Was I said SMU needed to get off to a fast start, or else things would just snowball into worse for them. And that's what the theme was with SMU all year. They don't get that 7-0 lead when Kevin Jennings throws that 4th down incompletion earlier in the game, and everything just snowballs for the offense. But you have to credit Penn State for putting SMU in tough situations, because I didn't feel like Penn State was trying to sack Kevin. They did get 3 sacks on Kevin Jennings, but they weren't trying to bring a lot of pressure. They were just trying to make him scramble about the pocket and throw on the run, and that alone was causing some of these turnovers. At 3rd and 16, Penn State's crowd brought the noise. This game's going to be in the Fiesta Bowl, so they're not going to bring that same Penn State will have a ton of fans there, but it's not going to be a whiteout atmosphere in Happy Valley, cold temperatures, that it's not going to be as hostile an environment. But still, Penn State's defense can put teams into tough situations. So I think you give a lot of credit to the Nittany Lions there. But then, again, their offense started super slow against SMU. They were punting early in that game. They had a 4th and 1 at the 19 that got stopped, and it looked like SMU was going to get all the momentum back before that second Dominic DeLuca interception. With Penn State in this game, I think the offense is going to handle this pretty well. Boise State's defense, some of the struggles of the unit are they do miss a lot of tackles, where I think Nick Singleton and Katron Allen can have another good game in the run game. I mean, they handled SMU's 3rd-ranked run defense in terms of yards per carry allowed. They had 4.7 yards per carry, 189 yards 3 touchdowns. They did really well against SMU's defense compared to most teams. Katron Allen gets that 25-yard touchdown run in the second quarter, and that just opens everything else up for Singleton and Allen the rest of the day. So I think Penn State will try to attack with a rushing attack, but where Boise State's biggest weakness is the passing defense. And Drew Allar, last time he played in a controlled climate stadium in the Big Ten championship game, did a pretty good job of picking apart Oregon's defense with the 2 interceptions aside. So I think Penn State's going to see more Tyler Warren this game than we saw in the SMU game, and just better passing attack in general. I think that the Nittany Lions can get 30 points in this game, and this time it's by virtue more of their offense.
Get Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation's Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty. Steve joins us on a regular basis to break down college football, the G5 in particular, and was on hand covering that Penn State SMU playoff game firsthand in the stadium. And I'll ask you this, Steve, in regards to Drew Allar, and that game against SMU was not the best barometer of how much he's grown as a quarterback, because this was a guy that has exceptional talent. That's not debatable. 5-star coming out of high school. Penn State starter, of course, through a decent 2023, but a lot of criticism of not facing the best defenses and checking down way too much, being indecisive, that sort of thing. But man, just to watch him, especially in the Big Ten championship game, but that was just kind of the culmination of what Drew Allar's become. And to me, it's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He takes charges of the offense. He's a competitor. He's got arm talent that's ridiculous, that he's starting to feel the confidence to let it loose at times. And again, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you were there, in regards to the Penn State offense, on one hand, it did take them a while to get going. They had a 3-and-out to start, but when your defense is getting pick six, and you don't get back onto the field, and then SMU had another long drive, that first drive of the game after the interception, and then of course another drive. They weren't on the field much in the first half, and then at that point they really weren't needed, and he wasn't needed to open up the offense and do much, just trying to protect a 4-touchdown lead. But basically, your thoughts about Drew Allar and what's been criticized as a Penn State wide receiver core that really has not much ability to take the top off the defense.
Yeah, I think the best part about Drew Allar this year is his pocket presence. I've been very impressed just watching him navigate the pocket. He is a super aware quarterback. He doesn't take too many sacks, only averaging 1 per game that he's taken this year. And he does a really good job of I think his mobility's really improved. You see him break. He doesn't run for 60 yards in a game, but you really see him break open a good first down run at least once a game. He did that in the SMU game, I think right before the Katron Allen 25-yard touchdown. And his pocket presence is tremendous. He's going to stay another year in college. I think he could be a first-round NFL draft pick with the amount of growth he's shown this season. You saw a lot of that in that USC game earlier this year when he was down 14 in that game, leading critical drives, converting 4th down, staying poised throughout the game. You saw it again in the Minnesota game. A lot of frustration. Penn State's trailing in that game. Drew Allar handles that second half of that game really well. So I think he's really improved as a quarterback, and that's going to help Penn State a lot. And as far as their passing offense, yes, it's very dominated by Tyler Warren, but it's a good sign for Penn State that they could win handily against SMU, and Tyler Warren felt like a non-factor in that game compared to normal. But you do need better production from the normal receiving core. Trey Wallace, he's had some really good games this year. I know he had that first half against West Virginia at the beginning of the year where he looked like he was going to truly be a star receiver. But I feel like Wallace ended the year playing pretty well. He had some key catches in those Minnesota and Oregon games to help. And Amari Evans, you can find him on a deep ball every once in a while, and he's somebody which, with Boise State's passing defense, they rank 109th nationally. I think Amari Evans is somebody you're going to have to watch for in this game to maybe make a big play or two to really help Penn State navigate downfield.
So, Steve, how do you think the Boise State defense overall stacks up against Penn State's offense, with the obvious question being, do they have the size and the stamina to stand up at the point of attack?
They're good up front. They're really physical up front. The best part of Boise State is also the best part of SMU, and that's the defensive line, specifically the defensive ends for Boise State. Ahmed Hassanein and Jaden Virgin Morgan, both those guys this year had a lot of sacks, forced a lot of pressures, and that was one thing that made Boise State a pretty stellar defense for most of the year. I said earlier, they're not the best passing defense, but they contain the run pretty well. They do force a lot of pressure, and they had 4 different players with at least 5.5 sacks this year, with Virgin Morgan and Hassanein being 2 of them. Another guy you need to watch on that defense is Sia Oladipo, who's going to come in a lot of safety blitzes. He's somebody Boise State likes to keep in the box a lot, but he's going to also have to excel in coverage in this game because Boise State's going to need that, especially scheming Tyler Warren out of the game in kind of the same way that SMU was able to, putting a lot of double teams on him, etc. One thing Boise State's defense does not do a good job of is forcing turnovers. They did not do too much of that this year. They only had, I think, like 7 interceptions all year, which wasn't a great amount. And against Penn State, you're going to have to force some of those and win that turnover battle, something that SMU lost terribly. But the good thing about Boise State is their offense doesn't force too many turnovers. So that's going to help Maddox Madsen can really keep control of the ball on passing plays. That's going to be a big help for Boise State's defense because you don't want their defense in short fields against Penn State. But I thought overall the defense did pretty decent job for most of the year overall, and the upfront is where they're going to have to try to win that battle against the Penn State offensive line, because Penn State can win this game and lose that battle with their O-line versus Boise State's defensive line, but Boise State cannot win this game and lose that battle of their defensive line versus Penn State's offensive line.
Disputed National Champions. It's a 1990s historical reset. Give it a look. The link's in the description section down below. You're a college football junkie. You will love this book. It's not just a history book. It looks at the BCS, the 14, the 12 team, and the proposed 14-team playoff and how that would play out as well. Steve, have you made a prediction on this game?
I have not formalized one, but I can get one right now. I do want, since you're just talking about your book and the college football history associated with it, I want to bring some college football history to this stream right here. Penn State all-time is 7-0 in the Fiesta Bowl. Boise State all-time is 3-0 in the Fiesta Bowl. Those are the best Fiesta Bowl records of teams with multiple Fiesta Bowl appearances. So a lot of great memories between these fan bases in Arizona. Penn State's are a little more historic. Their only 21st century appearance was back in 2017 against Washington, while Boise State had 3 appearances in the 21st century, most notably the 2006 game against Oklahoma. So I think that's kind of cool history that you're bringing the 2 Fiesta Bowl, the best Fiesta Bowl champions in the same stadium to play in this bowl game. For my prediction in this, I think Penn State maintains this undefeated Fiesta Bowl record and improves to 8-0 in the bowl game. I'm going to say Penn State wins something along the lines of, I know the spread's 11.5. I'm going to say Penn State gets at least 30 points. I'll say Penn State 35, Boise State 24. So Boise State barely covers that spread there. Ashton Jeanty, I think he's due for another good day. Just he produced in every single game this year. He's had a 60-yard run in 8 of 13 games, so he's going to break a long one in this game. We're going to see that happen. Boise State's going to hang in there for a bit, but Penn State's defense overall is just going to force enough stops, and Drew Allar is going to have a lot better of a performance, more reminiscent of what he did in the Big Ten championship against Oregon, as Penn State gets 35 points and advances to the semifinal in the Orange Bowl.
It was funny. We had a caller this week who said, I would like a more traditional Fiesta Bowl matchup. Penn State doesn't belong in the Fiesta Bowl. I would like to see a more traditional. And I said, can you please define a traditional Fiesta Bowl matchup? Because it's never been tied to a conference, number one. Number two, Penn State has appeared in 7 Fiesta Bowls. They've appeared in more Fiesta Bowls maybe than anyone. All right, Steve, we appreciate you being here. Enjoy the game. And again, catch Steve's work at SB Nation, Underdog, Dynasty, and also Hustle Belt. Steve, as always, we appreciate the breakdown.
Thank you. Appreciate it.